Segue to over the summer, actually last semester, I read How Learning Works, and it was kind of all about the latest research on pedagogy and learning and the whole bit. And one of the things that I liked a lot, there's a whole chapter on student development and how that affects the class. And so it talks about the Chickering model, and I'm going to read a quote now. But this is a quote from the Chickering model on page 160 if you're following along at home. But it says, students with a well-developed sense of self feel less threatened by new ideas involving beliefs that conflict with their own. And so since you teach sex and gender, and primarily to traditional age students, I don't think I've really, I can think of myself when I was 18 to 22, but most people from 18 to 22 are not well-developed in their sexual or gender identity. They might think they are, but like if we actually broke it down in front of them, they'd be like, oh no, And so
Right.
how does that that has to have an impact in the room. And I'd love to hear what you think, being that those are the topics you teach, people might be really fragile in these areas. And so if you come in, with a head of steam, what impact does that have, and how does that affect the learning? That's what I want to know.
Right. Well, this is a really interesting question. Your quote is really interesting, in part because I come from this very unique background, right? And so I think I have a slightly different perspective on where these students are coming from than some other folks. I come from an incredibly conservative evangelical Christian background. So when I went to a secular college instead of a religious college, that was a really, really big deal. And so I ended up at this big private school on the East Coast. I was from this little town in Southern California where everybody either went to a religious school or a community college or maybe UC Santa Barbara, right? That was a big school everybody went to. And I went, across the other side of the country and I almost felt attacked by so many of the ideas that I was hearing. I had never sort of been around so many people who thought that abortion was okay, right? And that was just very striking to me. And so I think I was a very good example of the students you're talking about in that quote, right? That students who have this very sort of well-defined sense of self are able to take in these different ideas, and students who are sort of going through a big transition phase might have a bigger reaction to ideas that are new to them. And that was me as a student. Why are these people talking about killing babies, right? It just was a very traumatizing experience for me in many ways that obviously changed my life. I ended up becoming a professor. And so because of that, I think, I might be slightly more sensitive to students who have a particular set of ideas that aren't the ones that we usually deal with in the academy. And so one of the things I try to do is give them, I try to do two things, right? I try to give them the tools with which to think through all these complex social issues, right? And so that's what the social theory is for. How can we think about these particular issues given these theories that we've read? And I try to sort of take it down a notch, if you will, right? So rather than, positioning the class as some place in which we're in search of the truth, or that we all need to sort of understand this thing in this particular way, I describe it as trying on a hat, right? So for my evangelical students, right? If they take a biology class, they have to try on the evolution hat, right? You don't have to believe it, but you got to try it on and speak in a particular language in that class, right? And that's all we're doing in sociology. We're just trying on a particular way of viewing something. It might work for you, it might not. But that's the exercise in this class. And I think then what that does is that the subtext of that is you don't have to buy what we're doing here, right? You don't have to see this thing this way. This is an intellectual exercise, and the mark of an intelligent person is to be able to take on different points of view about a particular topic. So all you're doing is becoming smarter by trying on this particular point of view, right?
I want to jump in if I can.
Absolutely.
So here's an interesting thing, right? I think that there is a mindset, or maybe I've imagined it, but I think there's a mindset that says that if you do that, which is this kind of, I call it take it or leave it. You know what I mean? It's right. If this works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, you have to show me that you were able to understand it and apply it. And then if you think I'm full of crap, or it's not about me, it's about sociology. But if you think sociology is full of crap, then fine. Then we're done. Then walk away. But then there's a part of me, like the social justice part of me, that's like, I probably should have gone in and advocated more. I probably should have, like spoke truth to power and come what may. And then I'm really of two minds on this, because the other side of it is like, you have to make space for everyone to come in at every level of being ready to learn, and you have to kind of give them everything they can handle, and as hopefully not more than they can. And so it's kind of like, because I've had friends of mine, especially like when I think back to graduate school and how we would talk about like the first semester teachers were talking about it, and some of them were like, I go in there and I just kind of rage against the machine and I put those punks in their place.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm just like, how's that work? Is it good? Like, do they learn? They do? Okay. And again, I want to be really clear. I'm not knocking anyone's approach. If that works for you, if you're getting dividends out of that, then keep going. But like it seems like to me that by kind of putting it all out there and then saying, here's how it could all make sense, but this is up to you. You make this decision. If they see it, they'll feel like they saw it, as opposed to, what the hell didn't you get? I told you that that's just,
Well, and I think one of the things you're highlighting is that there are lines, right? Like, I think that I have not here, but I've had colleagues before who will let students say things that I think would be racist, say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that I would leave up for debate. Say, hey, let's talk this one through, right? In part because, primarily because I want it to be a safe learning environment for everyone, and that makes it a hostile environment. So there are times when I don't say, hey, let's just try on these theories about this particular topic, right? There are lines. Right. But in general, I guess at this point I've seen enough students come back to me, students who really were hostile to a sociological interpretation of something. For one time in a masculinities class, a student just would sit in class with his arms folded like this and just frowned at me the whole time, and he was, much bigger than I was. I was still a graduate student at that point, but I was teaching my own seminar. It was a senior seminar. He was bigger than I was. He was older than I was, I think, or at least my age. He felt older. He had been, in the military, and I was very intimidated by him, and he was very hostile to what I was saying. We were talking about, I think, rape scandals in the military, and he was, putting out the notion that, well, rape wouldn't happen if women weren't on the military ships in the first place, right? And so very hostile. And toward the end of the class, we had read a couple things, and toward the end of the class, he came to my office and knocked on the door, and I said, come on in. And he said, he would call me Teach. He's like, hey, Teach, can I talk to you about something? I said, sure. And he sat down and ended up sharing this really incredible story about his childhood, in which he'd like to play with a certain kind of dolls, and he wasn't allowed to play with certain kind of dolls, that entailed all sorts of sort of humiliation, public humiliation by his brother, that he said he hadn't really thought about until he took this class. And this class made him realize how dangerous some of these messages we were giving about masculinity, were, and how they were given to him, and how damaging they were. And so, when I get to that point where I'm like, I should really take a stand here, right? I shouldn't just let them sort of, use this as a tool. It's more than a tool. I think about him and what the point he was able to come to that I would have never thought he'd be able to come to, and he did, and we're still in touch, and he makes a living as a social worker now. I mean, just a really amazing guy, an amazing change that had to do with understanding gender as a system rather than the sort of personal disposition. And so, yeah, I hold on to those nuggets, right?
Yeah.
And because to me, that's the development of this particular, it's a development of intelligence, the way to sort of think about things and change one's mind about things and deploy a variety of theories about a thing. So, yeah.
Okay.